Now we are getting into our paragraphs. We talked about a lot of different engagement types. We talked about their end products, their end goals. Now we're going to really dive into these paragraphs, and I gave comparisons and thoughts on what how you can think of them earlier on in the lesson. We're going to dive into the specifics, what the AICPA says about them, what I want you to know, my take on all of them. Now, this section addresses additional communications in the auditor's report. And what are those additional communications? These are going to be the emphasis of matter and other matter paragraph. Now, in one instance, for the emphasis of matter, these are going to be used to draw the user's attention to a matter or matters presented or disclosed in the financial statements that are of such importance that they are fundamental to the user's understanding. And then for other matter, draw the user's attention to any matters other than those that have been presented or disclosed. So in this case, it's something that is not in the report, but something you want to draw attention to. In this case, it is in the report, and you want to emphasize the item that is in the report. Now, what is the objective of the auditor? The objective of the auditor, having formed an opinion on the financial statements, is to draw the user's attention when, in the auditor's judgment, it is necessary to do so, by way of clear additional communication in the auditor's report to do the following. Matter, although appropriately presented or disclosed in the financial statements, that is of such importance, it's fundamental, making it clear, memorize this phrase, that it is of such importance that it is fundamental to the user's understanding, and then as appropriate, any other matter that is relevant to user's understanding, that is also going to be that other matter paragraph. If the auditor expects to include an emphasis of matter or other matter paragraph in the auditor's report, the auditor should communicate with those charged with governance regarding this expectation and the wording of the paragraph. Also, in general, you're going to agree upon what's going to be presented. You're not going to just issue an audit report without management reading it, without them seeing what's going on there. Obviously, it's up to you to issue whatever you want in your own audit report. However, it's not like you're going to blindside. But in general, specifically here, we're going to check in with management, those charged with governance, about what we are going to communicate here. Comparing the two, well, what is the distinguishing factor is that one, which is the emphasis of matter paragraph, is about matters already disclosed in the financial statements, and the second is about matters that are not disclosed. So really, I've kind of talked about that, but here it is in writing. Now, for the purposes of generally accepted auditing standards, the following terms have these meanings. Now, again, making sure you understand these. The emphasis of matter, emphasizing something that exists in the audit report. This is a paragraph included in the auditor's report that is required by generally accepted auditing standards, or is included at the auditor's discretion. Now, you may have to include an emphasis of matter paragraph. We'll talk about when you need to do that. A lot of times that may be if there's a going concern issue. That's one example. There's many other examples. However, but the auditor may include one just because they feel they need to. There's a lot of leniency, in your professional judgment. What do you think you need to emphasize? If you're a good auditor, it may not be the rule to do it, but you may want to emphasize something else for the benefit of the users of the financial statements. And that refers to a matter appropriately presented or disclosed in the financial statements that in the auditor's professional judgment is of such importance, as we've seen. And the other matter paragraph, this is going to be a paragraph included in the auditor's report that is required by GAAP or is included at the discretion, and that refers to matter other than those presented. So again, just beating that to death. I know, it's repetition, but that's how we are going to learn here. Now, how are these emphasis of matter paragraphs being used? Let's talk about the practicalities here. An emphasis of matter paragraph is used to highlight information that is important to the reader, but is not a material departure from GAAP. So, important key point here, it's not we're calling out an issue. If we were calling out a material departure from GAAP or any material issue, that would obviously modify the opinion. So this is not a cause for concern. This is just emphasizing something. An explanatory paragraph is used to explain something about the auditor's work or the financial statements that is not readily apparent from the financial statements themselves. Here is an example of an appropriate emphasis of matter paragraph, as discussed in Note 23 of the financial statements. Just to drill on this point, we went over possible notes to the financial statements, things you might see there. And we're going to have Note 1, Note 2, Note 3. Now, Note 23 to the financial statements might say that the company has changed its method of accounting of inventory for year 4. Now, that's pretty significant, especially if it's a massive manufacturing company. They have a lot of inventory. You as the auditor are going to want to include an emphasis of matter paragraph there and just emphasize, hey, make sure you check out this note. Make sure you do it. Otherwise, you may be skewed in your understanding of the financial statements. Now, a key important distinction I want to make is that an emphasis of matter paragraph is different from an explanatory paragraph. Now, which is also different from an other matter paragraph. However, these are very similar, as we'll see. An emphasis of matter paragraph is just basically highlighting or putting it in bold. I mean, not literally, but It's if there was a note to the financial statements, you're basically saying the same thing as discussed in the note. Company has changed its method, so you're stating it again. And just as I do multiple times, I repeat things because they are quite important. So too does an emphasis in matter paragraph just repeat this item so that the users see that. However, an explanatory paragraph, it's similar in the sense that it does relate to something in the financial statements, so it's different from an other matter. Other matter just talks about something that's not in the financial statements. This explanatory paragraph not only reiterates something, but it more so elaborates upon it. So it doesn't just say, okay, as discussed in the note that they've changed their policy. It might say a change in policy will result in a decrease in net income because that's going to increase their expenses. It's going to talk about it. It's going to explain the situation much more. So that's our difference here. I included it here because it's pretty closely related to our emphasis in matter paragraph, but just again, knowing that an explanatory paragraph is different, however, pretty closely related. It's just, it's like its cousin. So it would be included in the auditor's report when the auditor is unable to obtain sufficient evidence to form an opinion, when the auditor has identified a material uncertainty, or when the auditor has identified a going concern issue. It's going to elaborate upon all of these situations. What are we going to talk about here? Well, we're basically saying if the auditor considers it necessary to draw the user's attention to a matter, a bunch of other fluff per the CPA, the auditor should include an emphasis in matter paragraph in the report, provided that these following situations apply. Well, that the auditor would not be required to modify the opinion as a result of the matter. Well, let's think about that for a second. If you're emphasizing something, and because of that item, such as that change in inventory, if that, let's say, is departure from GAAP and you would need to modify the opinion, you shouldn't be doing an emphasis in matter paragraph. You should just be modifying your opinion, and that's a whole nother matter. And second point, the matter has not been determined to be a key audit matter to be communicated in the auditor's report. If something is as of significance to be a key audit matter, that shouldn't be an emphasis in matter paragraph. That should be separately put in that communication to those charged with governance. So again, difference there. These are quite different. Emphasis matter, something that's okay. Key audit matter, something of significant judgment, estimate, going to indicate a lot more concern. Differences there, make sure you are familiar. Continuing on, having some fun with these paragraphs. Make sure you're stretching. You are drinking some energy drinks or keep taking care of your health, whatever that looks like for you. Eat some fruit, take care, do some push-ups, do some jumping jacks, whatever. Keep the blood flowing as we power through. Continuing on, when the auditor includes an emphasis in matter paragraph in the report, what should the auditor do? Well, the auditor should include the paragraph with a separate section of the auditor's report with an appropriate heading. When key audit matters are communicated in the report, the heading should include the term emphasis of matter. Cool, pretty straightforward. They should also include in the paragraph a clear reference to the matter being emphasized, so saying it's note 23 in the financial statements. That's pretty clear. You're not trying to mislead anyone. You want to make it clear where to find that item. And lastly, you want to indicate that the auditor's opinion is not modified with respect to the matter emphasized. Again, drilling home this point that an emphasis matter paragraph is not there to talk about something bad. It's not particularly good or bad, but it's not saying that we're modifying the opinion. We are just saying that this is important. Take a look at it. So we also want to reiterate that this is not a modification. Now, when are we going to use an emphasis matter paragraph? This is an extensive list. However, it's not all-inclusive. There can be other items, and you may not see all these items on the exam, but it's a good reference. These are much more of the common ones you would see. So when would you see an emphasis matter paragraph that do not affect an auditor's unmodified opinion? Again, these are going to be items that are okay. They're okay that they're in the financial statements or that they occurred. You just want to emphasize them. So a material but justified change in accounting principle. So that's okay. We've talked about that at length throughout different lessons. This may be something such as the client's management not accounting for an unusual material transaction, as due to its unusual nature, accounting for it would present the financial statements as misleading. So we want to emphasize that. Any significant transactions with related parties. Now, related parties come up in all of our exams pretty much. When we deal with them in tax, a lot of times you may need to, it might actually affect the numbers. When we deal with financial statements, we might have to write off some of those transactions if they're not legitimate, if they're between particularly subsidiaries. However, with auditing, it's okay as long as it's disclosed. Obviously, there are other regulations, but in general, even if there's something bad, right, like even a going concern issue, it's not a big deal as long as it's properly disclosed. Also, we want to include an emphasis matter paragraph that the financial statements are prepared in accordance with a special purpose framework. If it's cash basis, it's probably one of the more main ones. the uncertainty of future events of which the outcome is not susceptible to reasonable estimation. This is going to be contingencies and commitments. We see we are referencing a lot of other lessons, a lot of other important points that we've gone through throughout the course. Also, a justified lack of consistency caused by a material change in GAAP between periods, such as a change in methods of accounting for inventory. So now, why is this important? Because you can't compare year 1 to year 2 financial statements because the inventory accounting method is different. Now that is a concern. However, in this case, it's justified, so that's fine. It's definitely not up to you for the exam to decide if it's justified. It'll tell you if it's justified. And then also a change from a non-GAAP principle to a GAAP principle. Now keep in mind that if there is a change from a non-GAAP accounting principle to one that is GAAP, this is considered a correction of a misstatement. As such, the auditor would have to evaluate the materiality of the misstatement and consider whether the previous opinion requires modification. Next, we have an uncertainty relating to the future outcome of unusually important litigation or regulatory action, kind of similar here. This is more talking about lawsuits, whereas this is talking more so about possible uncollectability of accounts receivable. That would be one example. We've got a significant subsequent event that occurs between the date of the financial statements and the date of the auditor's report. Again, tying all in, a lot of items we saw within management's responsibility. Some of these also have their own lessons. A major catastrophe that has had or continues to have a significant effect on the entity's financial position or results of operations, balance sheet or income statement. And lastly, a matter of such importance that is fundamental to the users. So it's really just a catch-all we see here. Really anything that you determine to be of such importance, we want to highlight it even more. Some miscellaneous items on the emphasis of matter paragraphs. Well, many questions you may see ask about a justified lack of consistency, which is immaterial, and nothing is needed to be discussed in the notes or auditor's report for situations such as these. So any material changes in GAAP, or even if you're right, if they're justified, they lack consistency, anything like that. If it's material and it's justified, make an emphasis of matter paragraph about it. If it's immaterial, you actually don't need to do anything. So just a reminder, generally for anything throughout the entire exam, with the exception of some items such as immaterial fraud by management, if something's immaterial, you don't need to worry about it. So general rule, obviously we've talked about exceptions throughout the entire course. However, if the change is expected to have a material change in future periods, it should be discussed in the notes to the financial statements and have an emphasis of matter paragraph in that report. Now, the AICPA requires that an emphasis of matter paragraph refer only to matters appropriately presented or disclosed in the financial statements. To include information in an emphasis of matter paragraph about a matter beyond what is presented or disclosed may raise questions about the appropriateness of such presentation or disclosure. Really, if what we're saying here is if it's something that is not included, you're going to use an other matter paragraph, or we're going to start to dive into that more. What are we going to do when we include this actual emphasis of matter paragraph in the auditor's report? Let's talk practicality here. The term emphasis of matter is required to be included in the heading when key audit matters are communicated to clearly differentiate the matter in the emphasis of matter paragraph from those included in the key audit matters section. So again, we want to reiterate that these are different. What are key audit matters? These are items that are very important, that they require a lot of subjectivity estimates and which particularly challenging within the audit. Emphasis of matter, these are just items you want to underline, bold. They're not particularly difficult items. They don't have to be, or they can be. But from the reader, so let's pretend you're not an accountant. You haven't taken this wonderful course here. If you see emphasis of matter and key audit matters, these terms may be quite similar to you, and you could easily get confused. So think about it from the perspective of a non-accountant, of someone who's just trying to make investment decisions and read these financial statements. So you don't want to confuse anyone. I mean, obviously at this point, we associate emphasis of matter much more with other matter, and we associate key audit matters similarly with critical audit matters, but someone who's not familiar with that differentiation might communicate and understand these very much to be the same. The auditor may add further context to describe emphasis of matter. For example, emphasis of matter dash subsequent event, right? We want to kind of elaborate more upon that as well. We could say this is emphasizing a change in inventory methods to further describe what's going on. The inclusion of an emphasis of matter paragraph in the auditor's report does not affect the opinion, as we mentioned before, and just want to reiterate that. You may see questions trying to trick you up with that, so do not fall for it. An emphasis of matter paragraph is not a substitute for the following. Well, a modified opinion, it's not a substitute for that. That's the whole foundation of the engagement, so Again, you're not going to say, oh, yeah, no, the financial statements are misstated just as an emphasis in that paragraph. Nope, that's a completely different report. Disclosures in the financial statements that the applicable financial reporting framework requires management to make or that are otherwise necessary to achieve fair presentation. So what this is saying is if management does not put a proper disclosure in that's required of them, you can't just go and put a emphasis matter paragraph instead of that. No, like that's not an excuse. It's not letting management get away with not including those appropriate disclosures. So just keeping that in mind there. And lastly here, it's not a substitute for reporting when after considering identified conditions or events and management's plans, the auditor concludes that substantial doubt, we've seen this phrase a million times, right, about the entity's ability to continue as a going concern for a reasonable period of time remains, in which case the auditor is required to include a separate section in the auditor's report. So make a note of these, be familiar, and you will do just fine. Let's talk about these other matter paragraphs. We've been hitting at them. I know you are just itching to get going with them. Well, if the auditor considers it necessary to communicate a matter other than those that are presented or disclosed in the financial statements that in the auditor's judgment is relevant to the user's understanding of the audit, we should use this other matter paragraph, provided that the matter has not been determined to be a key audit matter to be communicated in the auditor's report. Again, differentiating these two, we want to make sure that anything that should be a key audit matter is a key audit matter, and it's not confused or lumped in with these other matters. When the auditor includes an other matter paragraph in the report, the auditor should include the paragraph with a separate section, shocker, other matter, or other appropriate heading. When are we going to use these other matter paragraphs? Well, here are two situations. Well, the first is going to be in a case when noncompliance is identified and management and those charged with governance are not taking remedial actions. In such a case, the auditor is not allowed to withdraw from the audit engagement. Then, as an alternative course of action, the auditor should include an other matter paragraph to highlight the case of noncompliance. Now, why would you not be able to withdraw? I'm just going to use the classic example of the government requires this audit and they say you can't withdraw. So in that case, okay, you can't withdraw. So in this case, you see this noncompliance and you're just going to include an other matter paragraph there to highlight it. Also, in a case when a new or amended audit report has been issued after the subsequent discovery events, and also when management has restricted to amend the financial statements in this regard, and law does not prohibit management from such restriction. In this case, dealing with subsequent events, if they haven't done their part to adjust for those, then yeah, you're going to include this other matter paragraph. We decided to include a few more examples because we know we love here examples throughout the course. Examples are the way we learn. Here we go. More situations that require the use of an other matter paragraph. In situations where the auditor is unable to withdraw due to a limitation on the scope of their work, which has restricted them from obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Now, in this case, they can add an other matter paragraph explaining the reasons why the withdrawal was not possible. You see, like these are all items that you just wouldn't see within the financial statements. You're not gonna see any talk about scope limitations. It's not like you're emphasizing anything. So, and it's why we would use an other matter paragraph. You know, it really does tend to be that simple, but we'll obviously see other situations where, okay, it might be confusing, or you can have an emphasis matter or other matter, but really just think, like, is this something you would have seen in the financial statements? If not, you're going to use this other matter. You're also going to use it in cases where the auditor is engaged to report on two different sets of financial statements, where each one is prepared under a different general purpose framework. So it's going to be hard for you to emphasize something in that case because it's two separate sets of financial statements, so you're just going to create an other matter paragraph. And lastly here, when financial statements are prepared for a purpose meant for specific users, getting into restricted purpose territory there, the auditor shall add an other matter paragraph highlighting the fact that such financial statements are not meant for general users, even if such financial statements are prepared under general purpose financial reporting framework. So even if these financial statements are for GAAP, and even if, let's say, they would not mislead any investors or readers, if they are restricted use, you're going to state that. If for any reason, right? There's many reasons you would see restricted use report, but if it is, you're going to include an other matter paragraph. Talking in general about restricted reports and communicating that, well, in general, throughout various engagements and the audit exam here, when there are reports, communications, or other pieces of information that could mislead users of the financial statements who do not have a presumed adequate understanding of the material, these should be restricted use. This is something we've gone over, something we'll continue to go over. Not too much, because unfortunately our time will be coming to an end as we near our final lesson. but just making sure you understand this concept of restricted use and how we are not going to allow anyone, now, even if it's something that could get out, we're going to include lots of stamps, lots of obviously AICPA related requirements, such as including an other matter paragraph. But I'm sure you're also just going to stamp the front saying restricted use. You're not going to let anyone get their hands on that. That's a nice wrap up before we get to our ending of the lesson summary. Let's talk about our paragraph types and in which case you're going to use them. So, what is our paragraph type? Well, we've got emphasis in matter paragraph, we've got other matter, and we've got explanatory paragraphs, seeing them broken out and compared here. Now, in which case are you going to use an explanatory paragraph for any of these items? Well, it's going to be all of them. And we're going to see the differences between the emphasis of matter and other matter. However, and this is much more so, if we think issuers, this is going to be much more of an issuer related topic. But in general, for all of these, and these are items that we've seen throughout the lesson here and throughout the entire course, when are you going to use an emphasis of matter or an other matter? I would definitely memorize this, be familiar, and get to know it. Now, when going concern is alleviated, the substantial doubt about that going concern is alleviated, you're going to have an option for an optional emphasis of matter paragraph, and you're going to need to have that explanatory paragraph. I'm not going to say that you need explanatory paragraph every time. I'm just going to insinuate that now you're familiar. If there's a material justified change in accounting principle, you want to have an emphasis of matter paragraph to discuss that. Special purpose framework, if you're using cash basis, you want an emphasis of matter paragraph. If there's a change in audit opinion, if you originally had, let's say, a clean opinion, you change to modified or vice versa, you are going to either have an emphasis of matter paragraph or an other matter paragraph. What about if the report is restricted in use? You are going to use an other matter. And again, right, think about generally, are these items that you would see in the financial statements? And you're not going to see anything in the financial statements to emphasize that would say it's a restricted use report. And as such, you are going to need to give it another matter. What about if prior financial statements audited by prior auditor and prior auditor's report is not presented? You are going to give an other matter paragraph for comparability purposes. Compared to financial statements where the current year is audited and the prior period is not audited, you are going to include an other matter paragraph there as well. For our material inconsistency and other information, you're going to report in separate section, as well as the report on supplementary information within the auditor's report. And for any reference to required supplementary information, that is all going to be separately stated in a separate section. And lastly here, the report on compliance included in the auditor's report, that is going to be an other matter paragraph. Where are we going to put these paragraphs in relation to the opinion paragraph? It's not going to be specified, particularly for our emphasis in other matter paragraphs. However, the explanatory paragraph is going to need to be right after the opinion paragraph. Make sure you're familiar with this. Make sure you know it. I had a great time. I know you did as well. Let us wrap it up and call it a day. Hey there. Are you ready to not only pass your CPA exams, but truly understand and enjoy the material while studying? I know it seems impossible, right? Especially to enjoy the material. We'll do it together. Tap into the power of CPA.examprep.ai, where we've got personalized quizzes, multiple choice questions, memorization guides, flashcards, simulations, all tailored to your learning. Our adaptive study planning puts you on the fastest path to success and lifts you back up if you fall behind. Avoid wasting your precious time and money attempting an exam with a low chance of passing, because who wants that? We want to get you through this process as quick as possible. Our exam readiness prediction lets you walk in with confidence, knowing that you're prepared for success on exam day. Thankfully, there's no payment method needed to get started, so why don't you come join us? Visit cpa.examprep.ai and let's achieve your exam success together.